Hello, hello. You're listening to another episode of the Keto Answers podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Gustin, and joining me this week is Dr. Mike T. Nelson. Dr. Nelson is a PhD in exercise physiology, has his master's in biomechanics, and is an adjunct professor and a member of the American College of Sports Medicine. This guy is one of the most well-read and well-researched people about any subject, but his specialty is exercise physiology. This week, we chat about the definition of metabolic flexibility and why you shouldn't always be burning carbs or always be burning fat. We talk about the importance of measuring your heart rate variability and when ketones can be used to help out with traumatic brain injury. Tons of stuff in this one, so get ready to take some notes, and I hope you enjoy. Before we get to the episode, I wanted to chat about our sponsor, Perfect Keto. Perfect Keto is all about making a ketogenic diet healthy and accessible. Whether you're reading all of our online guides or articles or enjoying Perfect Keto's exogenous ketones or any other keto-friendly products, everything you need to make keto work for you is at perfectketo.com. I know what you're thinking. Hey, aren't you the founder of Perfect Keto? Yep, that's right. And all of my insanely high standards have been put into making each and every product. My background as a functional medicine clinician helps me craft the cleanest and healthiest possible products and best information about a ketogenic diet. Head on over to perfectketo.com to learn anything you need to know about the ketogenic diet. And if you've never tried any of our products before, feel free to use the code KETOPODCAST for 20% off your first order. With that being said, let's get into the show. All right, Dr. Mike T. Nelson, thanks for being on the show, buddy.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. Greatly appreciate it.
Well, of course, you are an expert of all things research and science, as well as something that's called flexible dieting, metabolic flexibility. That's can become a hot topic, so we'll get into that shortly. But to kind of dive into kind of what kind of doctor you are and what you specialize in, do you just want to give us a kind of brief recap, and then we'll dig in where necessary?
Sure. So when I check in sometimes at hotels, I checked in at one in Ohio a couple of years ago. Lady looks down. She's like, "Oh, and how was your trip?" "Oh, Dr. Nelson." I said, "Oh, it was pretty good." She's like, "Oh, so you must cut people open then, right?" I said, "No, I did a PhD in exercise physiology." She's like, "Oh."
Very disappointing, right?
Yeah, here's your room, Mr. Nelson.
Yeah, I think being a chiropractor is sometimes get the same the same type of disappointment, which is warranted. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So I did a PhD in exercise physiology, looking primarily at metabolic flexibility and heart rate variability. And then previous to that, I did a stint in the PhD program in biomedical engineering for a while. Decided I didn't want to do that the rest of my life, which is why I switched to exercise physiology. And before that, I did a master's in mechanical engineering, biomechanics. And undergrad was a Bachelor of Arts in Natural Science. And then, so right now I own my own business, which is Extreme Human Performance. I do some online training for nutrition and exercise and a couple other projects which we'll get into. And then I'm a faculty member at the Carrick Institute. They do a lot of functional neurology. And I teach online for Broadview and also Rocky Mountain University.
Busy guy.
Yeah, I do a few things.
Yeah, so suffice it to say, you understand the human body pretty damn well. I'm
getting there. It's always, as you know, it's a fascinating journey. When I'm recording this, I'm actually going to Arizona for a week to do some fresh tissue dissection with Tom Myers again.
Oh, nice. Expert.
Yeah, and that's, just the ability to do that and to just go look at stuff, even though I've taught anatomy and physiology in the past. It's always amazing that you still learn just tons of stuff by doing that. So it's a never-ending journey.
Yeah, I remember when we did that in grad school, that was probably the time where I've learned the most in such a short period of time. Like every 2 to 3 hours we would do dissection labs because we did a full cadaver dissection.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and for sure it was we did over the course of 9 months and the entire body. I can visually still see and remember so much stuff from that point. Everybody obviously learns differently, but doing that type of stuff is just invaluable.
Especially get the models.
Yeah, it's completely different. And to see the variation too with just anatomical structure, I mean, this is kind of a symbol of the individuality with health in human, whether it's nutrition or movement or whatever. Like there's so much variance from person to person.
Yeah, totally. And just when I was there, we had one guy who was older, and you don't know the history of the cadavers, and I mean, you could tell just by looking at him, pretty athletic, big insertions, bigger bone structures. And the cadaver we worked on was a, smaller lady who looked like she had been probably in a wheelchair the last, part of her life, and everything's kind of twisted, and just the differences from one person to the next was really amazing.
So are you splitting your time with more so looking at kind of performance and nutrition right now, or where do you think that line is kind of drawn as far as, I guess, function and nutrition?
Yeah, so the marketing people I worked with in the past yell at me because I don't necessarily, I have a specialty, but yet I don't. I mean, I guess I probably do more of the nutrition side just because that's where most of my work was in metabolism when I did my PhD. And I guess I view myself as a glorified translator trying to figure out how to bring everything together. So how do you get everything to play together? So for some of the online stuff I do, people I work with, they may have, a chiropractor, they may have a functional med person they're working with, or a physical therapist, or trying to, coordinate those things so that their training and nutrition program and everything is going in the right direction. And trying to know enough to be dangerous, but enough that I could call the functional med doc and be like, oh, I see you have these labs. Can you tell me a little bit more why you did this or that? So I have half an idea of what they're doing, not trying to replace any of those jobs, but, just making sure that everything is more coordinated. I think there isn't a lot of people to try to coordinate all of that together. Everything is more piecemeal, even just with exercise and nutrition. I mean, I've seen some, very good training programs, and they had someone else do their nutrition and they send it over to me, and I'm like, well, on paper, the nutrition looks pretty good, but the nutrition doesn't match their training program like at all. It's like the two people never even knew each other existed.
Right.
So that kind of drives me a little bit nuts.
What are some of the things that you notice that are mismatches there?
The biggest thing I see as a mismatch is just pretty basic overall, like I would say, even providing like carbohydrates for someone doing a glycolytic sport, whether that's strongman or CrossFit or something like that, or, the inverse. You see someone on super high calories, super high carbohydrates, and they're just not that active.
Right.
It doesn't mean that those plans independently are not good. I'm sure we'll get into like a ketogenic type diet. I've seen in the past, luckily not so much recently, ketogenic plans for people who want to be a highly competitive CrossFit Games athlete. I'm like, good luck with all that. It doesn't mean that a ketogenic diet is bad per se, but if you're competing in a glycolytic sport where you're burning through piss tons of carbohydrates, removing them out of your diet's not a good idea.
Right. And this is one of the things too, like I think the ketogenic diet is fantastic for a lot of reasons, but you have to ask yourself, what is your primary goal? And you made a very specific word choice here when you said someone competing in CrossFit. Right. I think if somebody is doing CrossFit just as an average Joe type of thing, and they know that they're on a ketogenic diet, but the role of CrossFit is either community or just getting a workout or whatever, and not having a program, but ratcheting down the expectations and performance and how much you push, you can do a ketogenic diet and do CrossFit, but just know that your performance is going to suffer. It might not be a good idea to push through it the same way you did it before, and realize that like you are not a competitor at a certain point. And so that's what I think probably what you're trying to say is like, if the goal doesn't match the nutrition, you're going to have a bad time.
Oh yeah. And it's all about a trade-off. I have some clients who do a ketogenic diet, and some of them, do more of a glycolytic type activity. But exactly what you said, we've had the conversation of, okay, what is your goal by doing this? Is your goal to be competitive and to be the best that there is? No, I like the community. I like going there. I don't, in a couple of cases, they don't enjoy doing any other type of exercise. So now I'm left with, okay, they like doing a ketogenic diet. It's worked pretty well for them. I can either force them carbohydrates, which they don't want, or remove them out of something that they already enjoy, knowing that there isn't anything else currently that they like to do. So now I'm having someone do less exercise, and they're probably going to be pretty pissed at me.
Right.
So I think it's just working with the person as an individual. And as much as I love physiology, and I'm not a psychologist at all, you quickly found when I worked with clients in person that a lot of times the psychology would trump the physiology. What they liked, what they enjoyed, and what they were going to do didn't always necessarily match up perfectly with, what would be the ideal physiology. But I think that's the job as a, coach, trainer, physician, or whatever you're doing, is you're working with the person in front of you and you're kind of making a little bit of a compromise, but you're explaining that to him in the process, right? You're saying, hey, if you want to do a ketogenic type diet, you may not be able to keep up with everyone else at your local box. It may take you a little longer, to recover. We can play around with, changing things, but in the end, it's kind of up to you in terms of what you want to do, and just realize there's going to be some trade-offs in that process too.
So are you noticing a lot of people switching over to a ketogenic diet from the people that you've worked with recently? It's been pretty hot last year or so.
Yeah. What's interesting enough is I don't see nearly as many questions or inquiries about it now as I did maybe a year or 2 years ago. And maybe because a lot of the people I deal with are, I don't want to say broken, but, have some mechanical or nutritional issues and tend to be much more on the higher stress spectrum.
Got it.
So usually I find with those people, ketogenics is definitely not where I would start with them. But if I have someone who's doing more lower intensity exercise, not super high intense exercise, and they're just generally not nearly as active, maybe throw in they've got a history of potentially some neurologic issues or an increased risk, then it's definitely something I think would be an option for them. I find a lot of it just comes down to their preferences. I would say from just general questions that I get, I still get a lot of questions about it. I think even on Facebook a couple of days ago, I had someone, and it's always like the same question. It's like, what do you think of a ketogenic diet? Or I get email from both sides, which is hilarious. Yeah. I get an email that says, I heard you hate ketogenic diets because you said for, strength and power athletes, they're no good. And then I'll get the next email that's like, well, I heard you're like for ketogenic diets and just because people have neurologic issues and other stuff. So, so the first question I always ask them is, well, what is your goal? If your goal is, I'm not exercising a lot, my schedule doesn't allow it or whatever, or, maybe I've got some neurologic things I'm looking at, then yeah, that may be a benefit. If it's, hey, I want to be the top, games competitor in CrossFit, right? If we take the other extreme, I'm definitely not going to have you start there, so, and there's shades of gray in between. I've got, some clients who do kind of like what Dom D'Agostino does, more weight training and definitely on the heavier range, but longer rest periods, lower reps. And some people I found, can do okay with that. Some people I found just, it's really, really hard for them to recover without a lot of carbohydrates. But at least the training that they're doing is not, 30 to 60 second, Metcons or medleys or things of that nature. It's much more ATP, PC, not as much carbohydrate based.
Right. And so when you're looking at this, I mean, you're probably finding just like everything everybody else should be right now is that it's a very individual thing. People like to get, especially with the ketogenic diet, since it's so new in popularity, kind of at a mass level, is that what should my carb intake be? Like, what are my macros? And it's like, this is a little bit more information that you're going to need to be successful here. Like you said, what's your goal? Like, what are you trying to do? And so we have a Facebook group too that we run. A lot of people ask questions on there. And I think my two answers that I give, like 99% of the time, are it depends and what is your goal? I think that if people just realize that like they should have a primary, secondary, and tertiary goal mapped out, and then you can be eating and choosing your nutrition based upon that. And that can change too. And so for right now, like mine is mental performance and just feeling good overall. Like I don't need to lose weight. I don't need to gain weight. I don't need to perform at a high level. I just want my brain to work well and I want to feel good. And so for me, that looks like a ketogenic diet most of the time. And so, yeah, I think that what's your goal is a pretty amazing question that a lot of people don't ask.
Yeah. And even I was just talking to a ketogenic researcher the other day. We were just kind of comparing notes and we both kind of agreed that the amount of variability we see is also very high. Like I'll have some people who do amazing on a ketogenic diet, and they would probably even sometimes push the envelope on what I would really recommend for exercise volume, and they do fine. I have other people who, they just don't seem to do well at all, and I get a few other people who send me, and one person in the past who kind of went off and did her own ketogenic diet, which I didn't know. So I looked at her nutrition log and I'm like, whoa, what's going on? And then we kind of had to change that a little bit too.
And so what were the problems you were seeing there?
Basically, the biggest problem I see if people are attempting to do a ketogenic diet, well, it's a little bit less than it used to be, is that I think it's just what I call the bastardized bodybuilding approach, where protein's pretty high, right. Like sometimes a gram per pound of body weight. Carbohydrates are just as low as they can get them in, just foods that they eat. And then fat's like, low to moderate, and you're in this, like I call that like the metabolic no man's land, where, you can convert protein over to carbohydrates, gluconeogenesis, but it's a very slow process and it's not an efficient one at all. And then most of the time your insulin level is going to be a little bit too high, right? So as listeners know, when your insulin level is high, your ketone levels are going to be much lower, because that's just kind of the function of how it works in simple speak. And then their fat's usually not remotely high enough either. So they're in this no man's land where they just feel like dog crap because their carbohydrates are really low. They're not really producing the sufficient amount of ketones. Performance kind of sucks. And then they're like, this ketogenic diet was horrible. Like, well, I can almost virtually guarantee there's no chance in hell that you were even close to producing a single ketone.
Yeah. I mean, this is the traditional, like, Atkins style, like, I tried low carb, it sucks. Like, okay, yes, it can suck, because if you're restricting your body from, you're not upping fat, like you said, keeping that low plus keeping carbohydrates low, your body's primarily going to run on one of the two fuels. And so if you kind of keep everything low, probably reduce your overall calorie load and not really eat much food in general, you're going to have some problems.
Yeah. Then you look, there's like no micronutrition or anything else. Just like,
yeah, it's a bunch of oils and butter and bacon and maybe some chicken breast and broccoli. Yep. Yeah, and that's broccoli is like the one colorful thing that people eat sometimes.
It's broccoli and asparagus, man.
It's good stuff. So looking at a ketogenic diet, besides like just going low carb like that, what do you see in the research that indicates benefit that people either aren't doing or glossing over?
To me, I guess the area that I'm most interested with a ketogenic diet is looking at more neurologic things. Like I said, I'm a faculty member of the Kerrigan Institute, and so I don't do the functional neurology like they do. I'm actually there to help with the human performance program that they're building. But I get to hang out with all these super smart people and pick their brain and kind of check into more research and things of that nature. So if you look at something like TBI, so traumatic brain injury, in essence, the energy producing system of the brain gets kind of scrambled during that process. There's some debate if a ketogenic diet, if you had to kind of be on it before the injury or can you go on it after. But I think the literature right now is relatively clear, if I go out on a limb, that ketones serve as a very good alternative fuel for the brain. And when you've got something like a TBI, when you have the carbohydrate portion gets kind of broken, that providing ketones can be a reasonable alternate fuel source at that time. You're also keeping insulin levels down, which may help with healing, possibly with inflammation. If you look at like George Brooks's lab, George Brooks is famously known, air quotes, would be kind of lactic acid, which is actually just lactate plus hydrogen ions. And the lactate is just like ketones are a very good fuel that's produced by the body. So he's done some work with lactate infusions post brain injury on some people. And last I heard was a rumor that they were looking at using different types of ketone products also. So I think that area is super interesting. And it's probably like a year and a half ago, I think I put a post on Facebook about, you watch like a football game, right? And people are very concerned about CTE and other types of brain trauma, that maybe in the future there'll be like the red container and the blue container. The red is like a carbohydrate based solution for people that don't have much brain trauma or don't get hit in the head really hard. maybe you've got more of a ketone site solution for people that get knocked out on the field, or maybe we'll find that providing ketones just during the game is, extremely beneficial and that type of thing. So I think there'll be a lot more interesting research to come out in that area. And then, looking at what types of ketones, from what I can gather and from talking to some researchers on some data that's not really out yet, BHB, so beta hydroxybutyrate, while it is considered a ketone by most, may not be as beneficial for brain trauma as maybe one of the other ketones.
Like 1,3-butane-diol or something like that?
Yeah, because that one will produce a little bit lower BHB, and I know that one's being developed possibly as a supplement and for other reasons too. So acetoacetate may be better for brain things. Not really sure yet. So I find that area pretty fascinating. So not only do we have a ketogenic diet, we have possibly now exogenous ketones, right? So we can get BHB salts as a supplement. Now it appears we can get esters also as a supplement. And so as you know, when you get into esters, you can get a little bit more fine-tuned with the types of ketone metabolites that you're elevating, and half-life and things of that nature too. So it makes it super interesting that we may have a convenient solution to possibly reducing effects from brain trauma.
Yeah, one of the things that I hope we start looking into more is, the fact that a lot of research points to when you administer something like an exogenous ketone, even when you're eating carbohydrates, that your brain preferentially uptakes ketones for energy sources.
Yeah.
And so, like you said, red container, blue container, but even if we make a solution that has carbohydrate and ketones together so that they could fuel, for instance, a glycolytic sport or a high performance sport like something like football, but also protect against brain trauma. So that way, like they're sipping on a Gatorade type stuff, which I don't know if I'd really recommend that for, just the types of ingredients they have in it. But something of a solution where it has both glucose and beta hydroxybutyrate or some type of ketone ester in it. So that way, if they do have some type of brain trauma, that the brain immediately has energy to run on, and it doesn't have to, like you said, get all crossed up with the glucose metabolism. So that could be an interesting kind of application on that route.
Yeah, and there was in the study that you saw in cell metabolism, I think it was 2 years ago now, that I looked at that in a pretty elite cyclist, looking at carbohydrate replenishment and also ketone ester, I believe. And if I remember right, I think it was sponsored by the company that makes it, which doesn't mean that it's bad, but makes you kind of wonder a little bit. And if I remember correctly, they saw like about a 2% increase, which doesn't sound like a lot, but in a group of elite cyclists, that's pretty significant. And so what they were doing is exactly what you're talking about. So they provided them a lot of carbohydrates, and then they've also provided them ketones as a supplement. And I think for performance, I find that fascinating, because then you're trying to figure out, okay, what fuel is best, and if you provide both, are there some benefits to both of them? I guess I have some theoretical concerns about that for people who are not exercising, because in physiology, when you look, when ketones are normally elevated, insulin is also very low, right? So if we throw out supplements, right? So you can do this by ketogenic diet, right? Which is usually very low carbohydrate intake. So insulin goes down, ketones go up. We look at extended periods of fasting or starvation, right? Ketones go up and insulin goes really far down. Now, in theory, you can have a case where you could eat a very high insulin-producing carbohydrate-rich meal, and you could take a supplement to increase ketones at the same time. So now you have a case where insulin is high and exogenous ketones are also high. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad, but it does make me wonder, because other than an extreme case, like if you have a ketoacidosis or something like that, which you won't see in healthy people, we never really see that happen in any other physiologic state. So if you're exercising really intensely and you're basically running all these fuels through the system, can you get away with it? My guess is, yeah, probably. But now if you start removing exercise from that equation, I don't know. That makes me concerned, I guess. I don't know what your opinions on that are.
Yeah, interesting. So your argument is that it's just not normal to have both of those things in the bloodstream at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's a super big unknown, and we can't really find a case where it would occur naturally, which again doesn't automatically mean that it's bad. There's all sorts of things we've shown that are safe that don't naturally occur. We can bump up creatine levels to a little bit higher, and that appears to be, just fine. But I always get nervous when I look at systems as kind of a push-pull or the opposites. So whenever we take something that's always been kind of the opposite, like insulin and ketones tend to be opposites all the time, and now we flip them both on the same side. Yeah, I don't know. It makes me wonder if that's such a good idea, I guess.
Right, interesting. And is this like thinking of high carb plus supplemental ketones, or just like moderate carb, or?
Yeah, so it'd be like super high carbohydrate, super high levels of ketones in someone who's not really exercising. So what I've done with clients is I have used exogenous ketones and things of that nature, but I usually only do it in a more fasted type condition. So, 3 to 5 hours after a meal or first thing in the morning, and then some type of exercise. The thought process is maybe debatable if there's really much of a performance effect from that, but most of the time I'm having them do low to moderate type exercise. So my thought pattern is, can I give something that really kind of ramps up the use of fatty acids and also ketones, obviously, if I'm sort of pushing or goosing that end of the spectrum, right? So I'm on the fat end of the spectrum and not on the carbohydrate end of the spectrum, which is on the other side. Do I see a long-term sort of benefit possibly from that in terms of upregulating enzymes and basically just trying to push more flux through that end of the system? I don't know, to be honest, but at least in terms of a performance aspect, that's how I've been using them so far.
Right. Makes a lot of sense. Question that I have is you mentioned somebody who's not exercising who has high carbohydrate intake plus ketone intake. For someone who's not exercising, would you ever recommend a high carbohydrate diet even in the absence of ketone administration?
For someone who's not exercising, would I recommend a high carbohydrate diet?
Yeah.
In general, I find that I don't, because what I normally run into is, so when I'm looking at something, I'll look and say, okay, if the goal is more on the fat loss side, I'm probably going to set protein first. Like if you look at the literature, about 0.7 grams per pound of body weight, unless you're, really obese, is pretty good. We've got some cool chronic studies from Miro. Stu Phillips' lab ran one of them. And so there's about 5 chronic studies we can look at that says that amount of protein, and these were not always in exercise, but if you went about half of that, so about 0.35, we did see muscle loss when we just slashed your calories. Right? So one of the studies said, okay, Monday we've got 2 groups that come into the lab. One group gets 0.7 grams per pound of body weight. The other group gets 0.35 grams of protein per pound, so about half. And then all of you people get about 60% less calories than what you did before. So very radically cutting their calories. And what we see is in the low protein group, they do tend to lose muscle mass. So we know a higher amount of protein is helpful in order to try to retain as much muscle lean mass as we can. We know that does help with satiety, overeating, things of that nature. Normally then I'll set fat 40, 50, 60, 80 grams, nothing too crazy. And then I'll look to see how much exercise they do. And then I'll kind of adjust carbohydrates based on that. This is assuming someone's not doing a ketogenic type diet. And what I find is that most people, just by doing that, end up to be a little bit lower on the carbohydrate spectrum by virtue of doing that.
Right. And is weight loss, fat loss the primary goal that people you work with have, or is it, like you said, more mechanical problems?
Yeah, it's kind of both. So the people I work with usually have a body composition and a performance goal,
Well,
whether that's
always you want it all, right?
yeah, yeah. Whether it's someone who's more competitive, so a lot of times they may be in a weight class. I've worked with a few physique athletes, also some power lifters, some people who do CrossFit. So it's usually where they're at. So you're always kind of riding that fine line of, yeah, we want to work to get you a little bit better body composition, but we don't want your performance to ever get too far away, right? And hopefully you have a longer period of time that you can do that you can take someone and say, okay, we're going to really work more on body composition at this point. Okay, now we're really going to work on performance again at this point. But I find from a psychological standpoint, it's very hard to get too far away from either one of those, right? No one wants to do a diet and find that their performance just absolutely tanks. No one really wants to do better on performance and find they're getting way too fluffy or whatever the new word for that is. Right. So you're always kind of steering them in between both of those.
And so when you're working with people, let's just actually back up and talk about what metabolic flexibility is and how you define that.
Yeah, so metabolic flexibility is just simply how your body can use the right fuel at the right time. So during the two main fuels, if we just simplify it for now, would be fat and carbohydrates. So fat's going to be used most of the time. So resting metabolic rate, my bias is that should be mostly derived from fat, and during low to moderate intense exercise. As we scale up the intensity of the exercise, your body will then switch over to use more carbohydrates, excluding ATP, PC for kind of power and that type of stuff. So metabolic flexibility is how well can I use fat for more low intensity stuff? How well can I use carbohydrates on the higher intensity side? And then how well can I switch back and forth between them? So if I'm just kind of hanging out doing my day, most of that should probably be from fat as the main fuel source. If I go to the gym and I'm going to do a old school Bill Star 5x5 on deadlifts, how much of that can I fuel based on carbohydrates at that point? Because during the training, we want to see the highest performance that we can get. And we know that if you're working in that kind of glycolytic area, if you remove carbohydrates, we see performance dramatically tank. I mean, assuming we're not providing any other fuel. So if you look at a disease like McArdle's disease, actually missing genetically one of the enzymes to break down muscle glycogen, so stored carbohydrates, and their ability to do higher intensity exercise is just absolute crap, right? They just don't have the fuel that's present for that.
Right. And so people probably listen to this podcast, a lot of people who are in ketogenic diet, I think have a tough time admitting to themselves that your body can run on more than one thing, and that it's not dangerous to get out of a permanent state of ketosis. A lot of people think that, oh my God, I ate carbs today, everything's going to go downhill. Like if you have some metabolic problems or you're managing a disease state, it probably makes sense to more so be in a ketogenic state majority of the time. But like you said, your body should be able to use different fuel sources whenever it's appropriate. So that being said, like how do you track, or how do you acknowledge the fact that somebody can or cannot use one of these systems effectively, or switching back and forth is an easy process for them?
Yeah, so on the extreme ends of the spectrum, if we just stay with fats and carbs for now, and then we can add ketones to the mix, I look at, okay, so if I don't have a metabolic cart that's like 40 grand, so I had access to that when I was doing my research, how the hell would I figure it out, right? There's a couple ways. Again, they're field-based interventions. One of them is just looking at fasting, right? So when we fast, our insulin levels go down, and insulin, I think, is much better thought of as a fuel selector switch. I believe I stole that from Jeff Volek. So lower levels of insulin, it's going to push your body to use more fat. Higher levels of insulin is going to push your body to use more carbohydrates. So if you take in a super high carbohydrate meal, insulin goes up. And if we were to watch you on a metabolic cart, we would see that your body shifts over to use more carbohydrates, even in the absence of exercise. So on the low end or the fat end, the low intensity end, I think fasting is a pretty good rough marker for that. So if I have someone who can relatively easily fast for, 19 to 24 hours is kind of where I use, then I would argue they're probably pretty good at using fat.
And that's just them being psychologically or physiologically okay with this without like any type of mood, energy, hunger problems, or how do you really tracking that?
Yeah, exactly. That's the caveat is it should be relatively easy for them to do, right? Because especially very motivated type A people, they'll do anything. And you ask them, so what was your meal afterwards? Oh, I went across the street and had a buffet and this and that. And I'm like, so how was fasting? Oh, it was hard, but I made the 24 hours, man.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you can't do it, right? We can physiologically and psychologically override a lot of things. That doesn't make them a good thing. But what I'm looking at is, if you normally consume 1 cup of coffee, I shouldn't see 7 cups of coffee the day you were fasting, right? I shouldn't see that all you thought about was, the next meal you were going to eat, right? It should be pretty easy. You should, kind of just forget about food and not realize you forgot about food, right? So I'm looking at a lot of the qualitative indicators. A lot of times I look at HRV, so heart rate variability. If I see their heart rate variability just completely tanked, so meaning they got extremely stressful on the next reading, I don't know, maybe we pushed it a little bit too hard. I mean, it'll probably change a little bit, but I don't want to see a drastic change. So that's kind of the qualifications I would put on that part of it.
Are you ever looking at blood glucose or blood ketone levels?
You can. I played around a lot with that, to be honest. I'm actually wearing a 2-week continuous glucose monitor right now. So
from where?
It's the Libre Freestyle.
Do you like it?
I don't know. I'll see the data. I take it off tomorrow at 3. It stops recording, and so I'll get the data in the early years. So it seems to be pretty cool so far from what I read on it.
You don't get it real time?
You can, but the physician I work with, she has the reader and I don't. So,
okay.
I know, which at first I was like, oh, I want to know what's going on. But the more I thought about it, I'm like, this is probably better because otherwise I'd probably do even more crazy things just to to see what would happen. But yeah, it takes a reading about every 5 minutes. So you have this kind of continuous pattern. I played around with, obviously you can get the prick your finger, Precision Extra, whatever system you want. I usually don't see ketones go up that much in people after fasting. Some people who've done ketogenic type diets, I will see that they do kind of elevate towards the end. But in most people, again, I've only done it in a handful of people because the stupid strips are like $3 to $4 a strip. I don't see them go up too much. By definition of fasting, I'm using a period of time where people are not consuming any calories. So they're not taking exogenous ketones, they're not taking MCT, they're not doing anything like that.
Right.
So I think it's useful. I have used AM glucose readings a fair amount. I find that can be pretty insightful, just on where you're at. And again, you're not looking at insulin or anything else, but if I see someone kind of really oscillating between 81 to 112 from one day to the next, oh boy, I'm kind of wondering what's going on. And the numbers are not astronomically high; they're pushing the high level. But I'd usually like to see, and I stole this from a Dr. Brian Walsh, 80 to 89, somewhere around there, and they should be rather tight. There's going to be variability, but I shouldn't see like a 79 one day and 108 the next day.
So, what would that indicate if somebody did have that variability, and what would you kind of interview them with?
Yeah, I don't know yet. I'm actually in the process of trying to figure that out, so I'm open to any suggestions. The times that I have seen it so far, the people have been under pretty high stress and have what I would say is interesting nutrition and oscillating between periods of very low calorie to a little bit higher calorie. But I think as far as I can ascertain that glucose may be an underlying marker of maybe more inflammation and stress and everything else. I've noticed in myself and other clients too that like sleep will make a massive difference in it. And we've seen data on that, right? You can There's a famous University of Illinois study where they sleep deprived, college age students for I think 7 days, and like borderline type 2 diabetics by the end. So that will definitely change. So I'm in the process of looking at that compared to heart rate variability. Right? I'm blanking on the name, but he was on a podcast recently where he will use that as kind of a surrogate marker for stress in athletes. So the next thing that I would do then, which again, they'd want to do this under their physician, but if I give them some type of glucose challenge, do their levels come up and do they come back down? How high do they go? And so if you do like a OGTT or oral glucose tolerance test, in essence, you take about 80 grams of a quote unquote fast acting carbohydrate, usually dextrose, and then we measure your glucose levels. And if you're in a lab, you'd measure insulin at the same time. So how well can you kind of handle that challenge of a high amount of carbohydrates? In the real world, I'll use sometimes what I call the Pop-Tart challenge. So for breakfast one day, have 2 Pop-Tarts and then report how you feel afterwards for a while. And if 30 minutes after you eat 2 Pop-Tarts, you feel like you want to crawl back in the hole and take a nap, it's maybe not the best when you can get fancier and measure glucose and that kind of stuff too. But
so you don't have everybody say, I felt like shit after I ate 2 Pop-Tarts?
No, actually, which is surprising, right? So in my head, I'm thinking, okay, so what if I'm going from all the way from fat metabolism all the way to carbohydrate metabolism? What is like the extremes I could pin on that, right? So the extreme on fat, hey, can you fast pretty easily for 24 hours? Extreme on the right, what's like a highly processed food that's almost indestructible, right? I was down in Texas kiteboarding. You leave the Pop-Tarts on the dash of your car and, the frosting never melts. That's just crazy. It's like some polymer, It's about 80 grams of glucose and not much else, right? So what can I take a super highly processed, primarily all carbohydrate food, and how well can they handle that?
But are you checking how they handle processed foods or carbohydrate?
Kind of both. I just went to the extreme on both because I also needed something that people can buy in the store.
Right. I wonder if something like maybe like something like a Gatorade or even like 2 cups of rice or something like that, or a can of beans or something like that would be like.
Yeah, you can do all sorts of interesting things. I know our friend Rob Wolf has done this too with him and his wife. They'll compare their readings eating the same food. I was in teaching down in Costa Rica with Dr. Ben House, who you probably know, Functional Med Costa Rica, and they had the continuous glucose monitors on, I think probably like a good more than a dozen people down there. And so we were all doing the same thing. We're eating the same food. We're in the same place. We're all doing about the same amount of exercise for the most part. And it was crazy to see some of the data where some people, one guy in particular, like you gave him pineapple and his glucose levels went sky high. The next person didn't hardly budge at all. And they ate, they're similar sized mammals. They ate about the same amount. It's not a perfectly controlled experiment.
Similar sized mammals.
Yeah, big lifting dudes, One guy could eat like a piss ton of ice cream at night. No difference. One other guy, for whatever reason, ice cream drove his levels super high.
Yeah, I mean, I know. Yeah, Rob likes to point to a study that compared bananas and cookies. I think.
Yeah.
It was the same response that some of the group they had a huge response in bananas but not to cookies, and then vice versa. And I mean, this goes to show that anybody listening to this podcast, like you are an individual. Like I can't tell you, Dr. Mike here can't tell you what you should be eating. I mean, we can kind of give you a grouping of things. I mean, I think there's no argument to you should eat real food generally over not real food. But after that, specific foods, that really depends on you. Like maybe it's pineapple, maybe it's apples, maybe it's not. If you do want carbohydrates, these things just really depend on your gut physiology, your own health history. And so, I mean, I think using a blood glucose meter and look at Rob Wolf's stuff where I think maybe on his Instagram or his Facebook, he's posted those videos of him and his wife.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, taking blood sugar at 0 minutes, 30, 60, 90 and seeing kind of where you peak and where it falls off, the foods that are lower on that end are probably the ones that you should be eating more of rather than the foods that spike and hold for a longer period of time. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And, before this test, I did some testing with like Botargo, which is a very fast acting carbohydrate. Got a lot of good data on it to show that. And the quote unquote conventional wisdom would say, oh my God, taking this massively spiking carbohydrate before training, that's going to be horrible. You're going to have, hypoglycemic response and all this stuff. And what I found in most people was it was pretty good. So a couple times that I've measured it, my blood glucose would only peak out at about 120. So I would take it on a day that I wasn't training in the morning just to see what would happen. And, after about an hour and a half, it would, pretty much come down to baseline. Came down relatively gradual, didn't crash or anything like that. But I have had a couple of people who would take in a high glycemic type carbohydrate like that, and the GI index is kind of bunk. But something that we know does spike insulin higher, and they would not react real well. So I think it's like I'm interested to see the data because I tested all sorts of stuff. So of course I tested Pop-Tarts, and then I tested Pop-Tarts before the walk, Pop-Tarts after a walk, Pop-Tarts before training. I only did 3
This is an excuse to eat Pop-Tarts for you, Mike. Come on.
I know. And then ice cream and other foods like that. And then I also did some periods of fasting and what I would say is more of a normal meal structure for me. So I'm interested to see how much of a difference there is. And then you can get into cooking methods, right? So I did some stuff with white rice. So I did it where I would make the white rice fresh. And then I also would do things where I leave it sit in the fridge, reheat it, put it back in the fridge again, right? So you increase resistant starch by doing that process, even if you were to reheat it before you eat again. So in theory, you should have a little bit less of a glucose response to that. So I'll see if that makes any difference or not. But
so then are you just logging when you did this stuff, and then you'll get the time logs back from your physician, or how does that work?
Yeah, so what it does is it timestamps every reading. So I've got my little notebook here in front of me where I log basically all my food and all the times. And then for training, I have a Garmin watch. So I would log the training. So I've got my time there, and I can see, rough idea of activity via step count and that type of thing. And then in the morning, I've been doing for quite a while, but I'll do heart rate variability. So I'll give me resting heart rate, HRV, which is a marker of autonomic stress. And then the coach I'm working with, Aaron Davis, we've been doing more omega wave. So I've been doing omega wave each morning then too.
Okay. So before I want to talk about HRV for a minute, but until we do that, you said that eating a high amount of carbohydrates, so you respond to that, and then fasting are 2 good indicators to see how you process both of the carbohydrate and fats. What about switching back and forth and the ability to do that? Is there anything that you do to mimic that or to test that ability?
Yeah, that one's a little bit harder to get at. But what I'll do is see how people handle higher carbohydrates before and during training, and then kind of how they feel, right? So people would want to test this out at breakfast, right? I want people to take a high glycemic type carbohydrate beverage and try to crawl under a heavy squat and squish themselves to the floor or whatever. Which don't do this at home, but I've actually tried to give myself hypoglycemic responses just to see what it felt like, which again, don't recommend.
Have you gotten there?
Yes, actually I was finally able to. And the interesting part is, at least in my case, it had very little to do with carbohydrates. So I would take like 3 scoops of Botargo and then go train, and I just couldn't get it to happen. But if I was super fatigued and super tired, drank like 2 cups of coffee and then did that about a third of the way through my training, then I would.
And what would that feel like for you?
Just dizzy, super lightheaded, like feel like you're just gonna pass out, and then you get that kind of shaky response where you get like all twitchy.
Yeah. So the first time this happened to me was a couple months ago. I was eating ketogenic diet for a long period of time, and then I went and ate. I don't know. I was traveling somewhere, tons of traveling. I ate a lot of carbohydrates in like a week, and then the day I got back it was some crazy international flight. I landed and then didn't eat all day, and then went to go work out, and worked out with some friends I hadn't seen in a while, and they were doing this crazy CrossFit style workout. It's like, oh yeah, might as well jump in. Felt fine. It hit me like 45 minutes into this like ridiculous workout after I hadn't eaten and had then eaten carbohydrates and been traveling for a week before that, and then ketogenic diet before that. And so my body's probably switching back into ketogenic state, and then all the travel and stress and everything like that thrown on top of it, and then thrown into a workout like that. And I had been doing gymnastics for a couple months prior to that, so I hadn't been doing a lot of CrossFit style workouts. I thought I was having a heart attack.
Yeah, you feel your heart rate just spike.
My heart rate just went crazy. I was getting super dizzy, like I was numb and tingly everywhere. It was really crazy. And then I actually had one of the products we have is a sweet potato powder, and I had that. Like one of my friends actually luckily had it there, and she's like, you need to chill out and like eat something right now. And then so I had that, and like within 30-40 minutes I felt fine. But yeah, it was terrifying. I literally thought I was having a heart attack. Like all the symptoms that I learned in school, I was like, uh-oh. Like, I'm 29. This should not be happening. What's going on here?
The one time when I did that too, I actually tried to get a blood glucose reading. And again, I've only done this twice, but my blood glucose wasn't that low, which I had a couple other people who would report symptoms, and so I'd say, okay, if you can, obviously be safe, don't injure yourself, don't be stupid. Send me a blood glucose reading if you can. And again, anecdotal, but they weren't super low. Although I have seen people who have done a ketogenic diet who I have seen their levels just bottom out for some reason.
Right.
And I can't find this piece of literature, and it's bugging the crap out of me. So maybe you or someone can find it. But I believe it was stating that you may get those symptoms of being hypoglycemic, but it's less about the absolute number, but has to do with the way your body gets skewed in terms of the gain, right? So if you think about it this way, that I've seen this happen in high-level endurance athletes who just eat crap tons of carbohydrates. They usually get it if their carbohydrates were lower during exercise. That the level doesn't bottom out, but let's say your body is tuned to using that level of carbohydrates. We'll just say blood glucose at a level of 90 for simple math. That over time, if it can't switch to any other fuel source, your brain goes, oh crap, we're at 85, we may start getting lower. This is bad. We're going to crank up the sympathetic system. We're going to get your attention. We're going to make you feel bad. We're going to do all these other things to try to get as much fuel as we can, because we can't really switch to any other fuel to use. So it's not as much possibly the drop in the level, and there's definitely clinical hypoglycemia. I'm not saying that there isn't, but that maybe the gain of that system just gets so tweaked that you can't handle those perturbations very well.
Yeah, I think that's what happened to me.
Yeah.
I didn't have a glucose meter. I mean, it was just funny because I actually usually do have a precision extra thing with me, but the freak I am.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it feels horrible.
Yeah, yeah. And then it happened a similar amount a couple of weeks later, kind of the same fashion. I was traveling a ton, then I was hanging out with a friend, and they wanted to work out, and I just did the workout with them like a fool and pushed it. But yeah, I mean, now I know what that feels like, and I know I'm not dying when that happens. I just need to eat some food. I've just been fasting so much recently too, and like doing intermittent fasting and not realizing that I didn't eat for 36 hours, and I try to do a ridiculous workout. I mean, it's not a good pairing.
Oh yeah, no, it's not recommended. And one other side point that's probably interesting for listeners too is that if they are doing like a ketogenic type diet, and some of the early studies in this were fascinating, and they said, okay, if we've got an endurance athlete, we believe metabolic flexibility can help for performance, so we're going to put them on a fat adaptation for maybe 6 to 8 weeks. You can argue if it's long enough or not. And then the night before the race, we're going to give them just a piss ton of carbohydrates. We're going to refill their glycogen stores. Yeah. They're going to go race, and it's going to be freaking amazing. We're going to create super athletes. Woo! And it was a total bust. It didn't really help their performance at all. And what they found was they would do a biopsy, and they would see that the glycogen levels were actually pretty good, right? So the body assimilated the carbohydrates, it stuck them into glycogen. But Stillingworth has shown this, and some other authors too, that So PDH enzyme, just kind of a little bit of the gatekeeper. So pyruvate dehydrogenase. On a high-fat ketogenic type diet, those levels will actually change. So that when you give someone a whole bunch of carbohydrates overnight in a very short period of time, they don't really have access as well to use those carbohydrates to the degree that they could. So, and I've talked to like Dom D'Agostino about this too, and we don't know what the variability on that is. I've had a few people where, a day or two and they're fine. I've had other people where, it took us like 2, 3, 4 weeks of kind of introducing carbohydrates before their kind of that top end performance came back, right? And people who are on the very competitive side. What's fascinating I mentioned about fasting though, is fasting does not appear to alter PDH enzyme, meaning that if I have someone who is, again, more of on the competitive side, right? Let's say they're a competitive CrossFit person, they're, they want to keep about the same body composition, but I want to increase their aerobic base a little bit. I want to bump up their ability to use fat more. I may have them do like fasting for 19 to 24 hours, which you'd work up to, and then do low to moderate intensity, boring, quote unquote, old school aerobic development on that day. And the other days I can keep their carbohydrates a little bit higher. I don't have to worry too much about them having that issue switching back and forth. I can do the fasting day. I can get the low insulin condition that I want, can increase use of fat as a fuel. Obviously, I'm dropping about a day's worth of calories out of their diet, which matters. And I can then give them a high carbohydrate or strength and power training the next day, and they can still kind of proceed and do pretty good.
Interesting. So moral of the story is that there is individuality and flexibility with all these things. Huh? I mean, at the other end, you have with ketones and fat adaptation, you have other enzymes and co-transporters that things like monocarboxylic acid transporters that you need to put the ketones into your cell to use as energy. And in the beginning, you're not going to have any of those, and then you'll have more later on. It's the same type of thing. Like your body gets efficient at what you want it to do or what fuels you're giving it. And it's kind of this back and forth. And so there's going to be an adaptation point no matter what. And that's why I think I'm in the camp too. Like you say, like you should be able to use both fuels. Like if you rely only on one or the other, then I think you're putting yourself in a disadvantageous position, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, right? Because my bias is the body is very much survival based. It's going to do anything it possibly can in order to survive, right? So if you go back to ancestral times and you're out, hunting woolly mammoth, if you maybe a day or two before you find any woolly mammoth and maybe you don't find any berries or anything like that, if you catch a woolly mammoth or kill it, you better be good at eating a lot of woolly mammoth for a while. Consequently, if you pass up a bunch of honey, I don't imagine the paleo man's going to be like, ooh, carbohydrates, they're so evil, I'm not going to eat any. They're probably going to eat as many as they possibly can. But those types of food sources were also very rare. Now as students, I'm like, hey, I give you $5 right now. What's the fastest you can go get me 500 calories? And it's amazing. You can be almost anywhere on the planet now almost. And it's pretty easy to pull that off, which is kind of scary.
Right. I mean, and also like how that comes is usually in the form of highly refined foods. Which is
totally. Yeah.
Sad, but it is what it is.
And I have another point on the ketogenic thing too that fascinates me is that you could take someone who has never been in ketosis in their entire life, right? Let's say it's Bob. He's 50 years old. He's 40 pounds overweight and loves his TV remote and doesn't exercise. And if we got him to start fasting, at some point he would literally still go into ketosis. That metabolic pathway is so incredibly conserved that he may have never been in it for 40 years of his life, but he can still do it, right? So to me, I find that part like just fascinating, that your body will still kind of keep that sort of metabolic machinery just in case it needs it, because that may be the last thing in order for survival.
Yeah, I mean, body's pretty crazy. I mean, anytime I learn something new is just a reminder that I don't know anything.
Yeah.
It's that thing where, the more you know, the less you know.
Yep.
So you've put this all kind of recently into a certification program?
Yeah, so I have a certification. It's called Flex Diet. So just go to flexdiet.com, FLEXDIET. And what I want to do is kind of combine the concepts of metabolic flexibility with flexible dieting. So we know that a more flexible approach, especially on the, as you say, more the psychology side and then also the physiology side, I think is a better combination. And then it goes through, what is the kind of, so each week, it's an 8-week course right now. Each week there's like one video that's kind of the big picture that kind of evolves from week to week. It's about an hour. And then there's an intervention each week. So I went through a lot of the literature and just on personal experience and said, okay, if I can make one change to the person, what is kind of the thing that I would do? And then what are things that have a higher effect? So, for example, number one would be protein. So we know protein, I found it's pretty easy for people to eat more protein. There's lots of beneficial effects. It's usually tolerated pretty well by most people, especially compared to carbohydrates and sometimes even fat. And then after that, there's 5 action items that are associated with each intervention. So one of them may be, eat 30 grams of protein within 30 minutes in the morning, or one of them may be, okay, just hit, 0.7 grams of protein per pound of body weight per day, so that the coach or the trainer will have the big picture theory and physiology, the theory of the intervention. So there's a whole hour lecture trying to distill everything down about protein into an hour, which is always fun. And then they have the specific action items for each one. So at the end of the day, they can then understand the theory, but that gives them a framework to present the actual action items to the client. So I think I wanted something that covers both of them, because there's a lot of really good information. There's a lot of good research and data, but what do you actually do with that, I think, can be kind of daunting. And when I went out and talked to a lot of coaches, a lot of them were pretty knowledgeable on nutrition. But then I said, hey, what does your gym do for your nutrition practice? And they're like, well, we just kind of tell people to eat better. I'm like, oh, how's that going for you? Like, not so well. And it was that they didn't have a system to put it in, and they didn't have a kind of a framework to play in. And it was a huge amount of effort on their part, right? So they have to design the system. What are they going to do? And what I found was they just ended up throwing 30-day challenges at people, which might be all right to get started. But it's like, what do you do on day 31 then? Oh, I just go back to eating the way I did before. Oh, well, okay. So.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anyone that I know that is better at pulling apart research and information out of that and discarding the bullshit research and pulling in the good stuff and actually using it in a way that makes sense. So, I mean, if you guys are looking at anything like that, like what we just talked about using this kind of pairing approach between metabolic flexibility and flexible dieting, I mean, definitely look there. And then before we go, I always want to go over what I think are kind of the 4 main pillars of health, which are nutrition, movement, stress, and sleep. So just chat a little bit about each one of these for what you do personally. I think maybe anything that you've learned there, and then just one big take-home tip. And so let's just start with nutrition. I think you already mentioned you eat primarily Pop-Tarts and ice cream.
Yeah.
Is that
right? Yeah, so for nutrition, I guess the thing that I really come to appreciate is how similar but yet individual everything is, right? We can look at research on protein and we're like, yeah, most people get about the same response, unless you compare, 20 to 71-year-olds, and then you get a different response. And then I think accounting for more of the effect of stress on the overall picture, and then also including more micronutrition. So as I've been more consistent with my nutrition, especially on times when I'm more stressed or have more things going on or I'm training harder, that seems to work better. So for me personally, I can do a ketogenic thing for a little while, but I know my training performance tends to go down. I can do fasting pretty well. And then for me, I find that, higher protein, moderate carbs, moderate fat, for me tends to work pretty good. I've got other clients who may be doing a ketogenic diet, and I've got other clients who are paradoxically a little bit lower, not super low on protein, and their carbohydrates are super high. they also sometimes train 1 to 2 times a day too. So I think just trying to figure out what works best for each client and trying to match up that with their overall goals.
Right. So what's your take-home tip there?
I guess my take-home tip is just pay attention to signals from your own body, because a lot of people just ignore that entirely. They're like, I read that XYZ diet is the best thing ever, so I did it. I'm like, well, how did you feel? Oh, like shit. I'm like, oh, well, you may want to try something different.
Right.
You know? And it's one of those things where it seems almost like too obvious, you know. Or I'll be like, how about you just increase the amount of vegetables you eat? You know, eat as many vegetables as you want. I want you to get like 3 different colors in every day, and do that for 30 days. How do you feel after that? Oh, wow, I feel really good. I'm like, oh, so what did you learn? I'm not sure. I'm like, maybe vegetables are good. Oh, yeah. It's like, it's almost like that listening to our body in terms of nutrition is almost just, it seems weird that we have to remind people to do that, I guess.
Right. Listen to yourself. Good tip. What about movement? You said that your training suffers if you go ketogenic for a long period of time. What are you doing for training?
Yeah, so now I'm actually moderate carbohydrates. I'm actually doing more of an aerobic block. So I'm working to try to get aerobic system up. So I'm only doing like 1-2 days of aerobic development. So I'll do one day that's a little bit higher intensity, which for me, being in the tundra of Minnesota, is playing broom ball. And then I'll do one day that's a little bit more aerobic development. So I use something called a Moxie monitor, which I got tested from Aaron Davis. It's looking at muscle oxygen levels. So how well can you saturate the muscle with oxygen? And then how well can the muscle actually pull off as much of that oxygen as possible? So my limitation right now is more on the desaturation side. So I can't completely offload as much oxygen as I should be able to. So we're just working on that. And then just doing 2 days of strength work right now, 1 upper body day, 1 lower body, and then just doing a little bit of grip stuff in there. So I guess my tip would be figure out what your goal is. So what is your overall goal? And then what do you need to do to get to it? So my overall goals are more related to strength, working to lift the Thomas Inch dumbbell and the Dinnie stones. But what I found was I couldn't really do as much volume and frequency as I wanted because I just wasn't recovering. And the theory we're going off of now is that maybe because my aerobic base was a little bit too low, we'll spend a period of time, we'll increase that, get it retested, see if that's good. And then as I transition back to more a higher volume of strength training, hopefully I can add more like, 1-2 days into it. And then also the side benefit is, as I know, I've been doing more aerobic work for about 2 months now, like just my overall energy level is a lot better and a lot more consistent. Or before I'd have just amazing days in the gym, and then I'd have a couple of days that were just dog shit.
And you think increasing your overall aerobic capacity has helped that just day to day, not even in the gym?
Yeah, it definitely seems to. And that's one thing I've noticed from talking to other coaches and just other professionals is that if you had 2 athletes, even if they could produce the same amount of speed and power, but athlete A had a higher aerobic base than athlete B, they would all pick athlete A, right? Because they can just handle much more work. And I think if I was honest with myself when I looked at my training, I just didn't do much cardiovascular stuff. I do like 1 high intensity day a week, and then I do like 5 days of strength training. I did like almost 0 low intensity aerobic development work for probably 3 years.
And so what are you doing now to nail into that a little bit more?
Yeah, so I've been doing more stuff on Concept 2 rower. So for example, like last night, I just went to the gym for about 30 minutes and just rode continuously at an average heart rate of 120 beats per minute. So pretty low heart rate, more just recovery day. Day before I played a broom ball game, so more high intensity. So my heart rate would average most games around 140 to 150. And so very interval based, play for a little while, come out, go back in. Usually would hit max heart rate of 180, somewhere around there.
So just hold on a second. Broom ball.
I forget, people probably don't know what the hell that is.
Yeah, I know what it is, obviously. Can you just take a second and fill people in? Because I'm sure people are going to comment and be like, what the hell is broom ball?
What the hell is that? It's basically poor man's hockey because I can't skate. So it's literally played on a hockey rink, but you have these little shoes that have this little foam on the bottom that sort of allows you to run on ice, which is just kind of a myth anyway. And then you've got plastic brooms and a round ball. So other than that, the rules are similar to hockey.
Yeah, it's actually pretty awesome.
It's super fun, and it's so bizarre because you just can't stop real fast.
Right. So tip, listen to yourself. Or no, set your goals. Right.
So set your large goal and then figure out, okay, what is the thing that you're missing that fits into that larger goal? And sadly, for most people, that means extending the time frame you're allowing yourself. So like some of the main goals I have now, I measure in like decades, literally, because I know that, if I want to pull like the Denny stones, right? So it's 734 pounds. It's a one lift attempt, no warm up. They sit outside, nothing else. So I'll probably have to hit about 800 in the gym in order to do that. If I'm honest right now, where I was before, I was at about 550. And I've been doing that for probably about 7 years. I started at like around 300. But along the way, I realized I had to change my stance a couple of times. Now I'm doing more aerobic development too. So it's kind of a constant process to allow yourself to take that kind of what looks like a step back in order to take 2 steps forward in the future.
Right. Smart. And then I think I know what you're going to say for stress management, which is HRV.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just know where it's at, because a lot of the clients I work with, I have a rule that I won't work with anyone unless I measure their HRV. And at this point, it is very useful for what I do. But the main thing is I want them to be aware of where they're actually at.
So, take a step back. You kind of briefly touched on this before, but HRV is heart rate variability. Do you just want to go into define that a little bit deeper, and then how people can actually measure that on their own?
Yeah. So heart rate variability, and we look at the autonomic nervous system. There's 2 branches. One's the parasympathetic, which is rest and digest. So like the brake pedal on the car, if I press harder on the brake, I will actually slow down heart rate, right? So I'm increasing what's called parasympathetic tone. So heart rate will slow down. If I step on the gas pedal, that's more like the sympathetic side, right? Heart rate and everything else is going to go faster. It's commonly called the fight or flight. So heart rate variability allows you now on your phone even. So when I was at the lab, like the used equipment we had was like 10 grand just to measure heart rate variability. Now since about like the last 6 years, you can get an app. I use the iFleet app and just put a little heart rate strap on one time in the morning, run the measurement, and it'll tell you resting heart rate, and it'll give you a marker, your HRV, of a 1 to 100 scale. So that marker tells you about how much stress your nervous system is under at that time. So this then allows you to quantify other things, right? So if I make a change to my training, maybe I add more recovery. So maybe I'll do a meditation type practice, or be quiet, or prayer, or whatever, or just take an evening walk. It allows you to kind of quantify different things in your life to make sure you're going in the right direction. I think performance, again, is a very good indicator, but we all know we can do things to see an acute bump in performance that may come at a higher stress level. That's fine if you're doing that as a competition day, but if that becomes your kind of every day, at some point, all the wheels are just going to fall off.
Got it. So I've actually noticed that. So I got an Apple Watch recently, more so. Yeah. So I'm like, just to track generally in workouts my heart rate. I don't think I don't know if there is an on-demand heart rate variability just baked into the Apple Watch. I haven't gotten there yet, but what I did notice that it does serve if I go to the health app, I think, in the phone.
Yep.
That they do give you an average heart rate variability on there.
Yeah, it's crap. Don't use it.
It's crap. Okay, yeah, that's what I was thinking as well. Just because I don't think the heart rate monitor on there is decent in the first place. Like, I don't even know if it's accurate enough to be able to tell the precision between heart rate or between heart rates. So, I mean, you're looking at basically the frequency in between peaks of certain heartbeats, right?
Yep. So you're looking at the top of the spiky R wave from one to the next, and you have to pick them off and be accurate within a few milliseconds. The hard part about the Apple Watch, and I have a Garmin watch, especially with the green light that they do, so they basically send the light through the skin to look at the pulse. it's very hard on the wrist in order to get that peak R wave very accurately.
Right.
They can run the algorithm, they can run the math, and the math can be correct. But the data that they're pulling off, I just haven't been impressed with the fidelity of that so far off of the wrist. The new ones are changing to a red light, which is supposed to be better, but the wrist is just a crappy location to get that anyway. So you would either need a specialized finger sensor, which is completely separate, or a heart rate strap. The Oura Ring is actually pretty accurate from what I've seen, because the finger is actually a very accurate place to gather data, and they sample it 256 times a second and do some pretty good stuff with it there.
So is it good enough just to get it once a day? Because I know Oura Ring, I was a little frustrated with it because I could only get it when I was sleeping. Like, it would give me it afterwards. So you can't actively go in there. I think they're going to have active monitoring with the new one.
Yes.
But I mean, is it good enough just to have some random point throughout the day when you're sleeping, for instance?
Yeah, the one thing I don't know on the Oura Ring, and I can email the guy there, they've been super cool and super helpful, very intelligent with what they've done. The thing that I don't know is you have to kind of be careful, and I think they do this, of grabbing it at the same time. And then the other part, which I'm just waiting to hear back from them on, is if you have a very low heart rate and you do HRV laying down, you can get something called parasympathetic saturation, meaning that the HRV and everything is accurate, but it's not super representative of kind of the background stress. So if I have someone who's got laying down resting heart rate of 36, I'm going to probably have them do HRV standing first thing in the morning. So most clients, I'll have them sit up on the edge of their bed, sit there for a minute or two, and then grab their reading. So I want the slight increase in heart rate and sympathetic tone just a little bit because you're working against gravity. But that is a constant because you're measuring it every day in that exact same position.
Got it.
What you see is that HRV will technically be, quote unquote, a little worse, but it'll more accurately reflect changes in stress and other things that's happened to them the day before.
And so a lot of people, I was confused when I first started doing this a couple of years ago. I don't track it as much anymore. It's because I have too much stuff going on right now. But
yeah,
I was confused. Like, well, what is good? What is bad? Like, what direction do we actually want to see? And can you touch on that quick?
Yep. It's highly individual, and it's made a little bit worse because each company will have their own kind of proprietary algorithm of translating it into usually a 1 to 100 scale.
Yeah.
So you definitely have to look on the system, assuming that you've got a system that's accurately measuring it.
Yeah, and that's what was confusing to me, and I think other people too, is that there's not like an international standard currently.
There is and there isn't. So
right.
There is a range, and you're looking at what's called a time domain number, but that number is really confusing because it doesn't line up on a nice 1 to 100 scale. So looking at number changes on a pure time scale is just not useful to consumers. So what I tell people is if you've got a system that accurately measures it, just run the baseline for 2 to 3 weeks. Make sure you're in a good position. Do it every day and only do it once a day. Don't do it any other time of the day. Do it first thing in the morning. If you need to use a bathroom, by all means, use the bathroom, then collect your data. Don't drink any water. Don't eat anything. Don't exercise. And then go back and look and see what happened. Right? Oh, I did a strength training day. Ooh. The next day, my HRV kind of went down, right? It became more stressful. Or, oh, I got less sleep. Oh, and see for you, one, what things had the biggest change in it, maybe nutrition, fasting, whatever. And then two, you can also look at your resting heart rate as a pretty good rough proxy for aerobic fitness. And for me personally, and again, this isn't based on a huge amount of data, if I have someone who's an athlete in a strength and power sport, I'd like to see them at least in the 50s sitting up. If they're an endurance athlete, I'd like to see them even lower. If they have a lot of anxiety or other issues, a lot of times their resting heart rate is also kind of elevated, which is a separate issue. And that'll give you an approximate of where you want to be. Like if I'm using the iThlete system, most of the time I want to see strength and power athlete, in the 60s to 70s, maybe 80s. And it's hard because it's not linear. So I've got some athletes that are hitting 80s and 90s of HRV, but it's not that much better than I've seen someone who's in the high 70s, low 80s, right? Because it's not this nice linear physiologic effect. And so you're just looking for kind of those changes from one day to the next. If I had someone who was in like an HRV, at least on the athlete scale of the 50s, I had someone the other day hit a 37. I'm like, holy crap, something's wrong, right? I actually got nervous and told him, like, you need to go in and get something checked out.
So generally, do you want higher or lower HRV over time?
So generally, you want a little bit higher. So higher is going to be a higher level of parasympathetic tone.
Right.
The catch and the big mistake I made when I started was thinking that, okay, if I trained on Monday, my HRV went up 12 points the next day. Oh boy, that's a pretty massive change. Even though it went up, even though it said I'm becoming more parasympathetic, what I found was that the following day it just utterly crashed. So
it's like a 2-day lag time or what?
Yeah, like if you go do heavy lactate-based work, I've seen, and got a lot of people now, HRV will go up the next day, and then it'll crash about 36, 48 hours later. I don't know why that is. There's only one study that's even kind of looked at that, and I've argued with other experts if it's even a real phenomenon or not. But I can literally almost recreate it in everybody.
Is it maybe like a like metabolite clearance type of effect here? Like
it could be. And then like when I talk to like Cal Dietz, University of Minnesota, they'll see some stuff like that on Omega Wave too. I think it might just be as simple as just a deviation from homeostasis, and it's just an overshoot, right? Your body's saying, holy crap, you beat the crap out of us. So we're going to try to get as parasympathetic as possible to try to recover from this. And then, oh yeah, there's a fair amount of residual stress associated with that. I don't know. That's just a wacky hypothesis right now.
Got it. Interesting. So tip on stress reduction, pay attention to your HRV.
Yeah. And just do it at the same time each day. You can play around with it at other times, but it gets super messy.
Yeah. What about like people who do it and then meditate and then check it again? Stuff like that.
That's fine. And so I've done that, right? I've taken like Alpha Brain or some other different nootropics and then done like some meditation, kind of like the modified Wim Hof that Bledsoe showed us and stuff. And I've gotten mine to go up 15 points in the matter of a half hour. And I got it to do it sometimes almost at the same resting heart rate. So it wasn't just a resting heart rate change.
Interesting.
Which is good. So that tells me that, hey, what I was doing made me more parasympathetic. So that's a good thing. The next question then is how long does it transfer? And usually what I find is that most of it is transient, which again doesn't mean that it's bad. I think people assume that, I measured it after my meditation. It's 12 points higher. Oh, it's going to stay that way for 24 hours. Yeah. I've only really found two things that have stayed longer than about 24 hours. I mean, without getting into doing stupid stuff that'll crush it, but things that would actually acutely increase HRV. So I found doing hands-on work like RPR, reflexive performance reset, and then actually having scar work done via like a dolphin microcurrent.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's probably a whole podcast in itself.
Yeah. Okay. Sleep. What do you got for sleep on me?
Yeah, I mean, for sleep, I think just going to bed around the same time, getting up around the same time. A tip I got from our friend Dan Party. I think you know Dan, right?
Yep.
Get outside in the morning to get some sunlight on the photoreceptors in the eye, because that's going to help anchor your circadian rhythm. And since I've been doing that myself and had a lot of my clients do that, a lot of times that may be just enough that they can screw up some of the other stuff and still be okay. You know, they can maybe handle a little bit more blue light in the evening and other things, and they're still tired and fall asleep.
You know what? This is one of the things, among a few other reasons, why I think blackout shades are really silly. Because then you wake up and you're not getting a real accordance to like, I mean, if you're a shift worker, I get it. But like, if you're not, then you don't actually get, because I mean, your eyelid is only so thick. And so the light can actually penetrate and start waking you up at a normal time. And so I usually do eye mask that falls off in the middle of the night anyway. And then I get that and I wake up to, I mean, I have luckily windows in my bedroom where the sunlight will be shining straight in my eyes if I'm not up before sunrise. And I think that's a really important thing. Like you said, it's just like having real sunlight when the sun rises.
Yeah, no, that's something I thought a lot about too, because I'm like, because we live in and I talked to Dan about this literally just yesterday, that when I was down in Costa Rica, I didn't realize how much just external light we have in the U.S. just pretty much everywhere.
Right.
So down there, obviously the place we're at had electricity, but we're in the middle of the jungle, so there's really no other external light. And when it gets dark, it's freaking dark. And, we didn't really have much for curtains or anything on the room, and it was just pitch black. But then you kind of wake up in the morning when it gets sunny again, which I tend to agree with you. I think that's more of a natural way to go. And so it's fascinating to me that, I think making your room darker is beneficial, but then I've wondered how much longer do you sleep than what you would need because you don't have that light stimulus in the morning. I even looked at getting one of those little alarm clocks that just slowly gets brighter and brighter. Right. Yeah, my wife was laughing at me about that.
I'm sure this wasn't the first thing she was laughing.
No,
that's true about.
She's getting used to it by now, but yeah.
That's great. So tip, get some sunlight in the morning. Excellent. All right, Doc, it's been a pleasure. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so the simplest place to find me is just go to the old website, which is just miketnelson.com, MIKETNELSON, and I have an opt-in there. They can get on my newsletter. So most of the information I send out right now is through the newsletter. So that's probably the best way to get a hold of me and see all the new stuff coming out.
Awesome. Well, I'll hit you up next time in Minnesota, and we'll do one of these guys in person.
Yeah, that'd be super fun. That'd be great.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Keto Answers podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, but even if you didn't, I would love a review. Just go over to iTunes, wherever you listen to your podcasts, and pop in a review so we can get found by more people, get better guests, and have the information that you need. So please go to iTunes, wherever you listen to your podcasts, and leave us a review. And if you're new to keto, head on over to perfectketo.com/podcast and enter your email for all our top tips and guides on getting started with the ketogenic diet. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.